Welcome everyone to Buddha's Center. My name is Jeff Allen. Tonight we're going over Bodhicitta according to Panchen Sonandrapa's general meaning of perfection. There's a wonderful section, as I've said many times, that I'm excited to teach that goes over the mind generation or the awakening mind, and specifically that of the Mahayana mind generation. So this evening we'll continue with Panchen Sonandrapa's text, using a lot of different resources to kind of elucidate the meaning of all of the categories and try and go as deep into the aspiring mind that we can within my capacity as an instructor, based on all of the excellent teachings I've been given by many great teachers, but specifically the teachings of Khyentse Geshe Wandak, who we all had the excellent fortune of meeting in this lifetime. So I just always want to begin by just saying thank you to Khyentse Geshe Wandak, thank you to Geshe Lobsang Gompo, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and any other teachers that I've received teachings from that have really impacted my mind. So I just want to say thank you to the teachers who elucidate the Dharma, because without the teachers, we would be completely lost. Without an explanation of these teachings, be very difficult for us to ascertain them. So we're also fortunate to have these great beings in our world who can explain these teachings to us so that we aren't so lost. Let's just get started by setting our motivation. Let's get into a physical posture that's specific, and that tells us that we're getting into a posture that is in order to do Dharma practice, because it's a very serious thing, and it's a posture that will enable us to do some of the higher practices later. But for now, we get into that posture to establish a level of mindfulness, to be very specific about what we're about to do. So let's start by getting into the 7-point Vairakana posture that we've gone over many times before, where we put our legs into eventually the full lotus posture, or half lotus, or just cross leg, or legs on the ground, whatever we're capable of doing at this point in time in our practice. We shouldn't be fixated on trying to get it perfect. We should just be trying to do it to the level that we can and aspire to do it perfect in the future. So we get into the posture with our legs, then our hands, with the right hand on top of the left with the thumbs touching, we place them comfortably in our lap. Some of the instructions say we can put them on our thighs as well, but general instruction of the 7-point Vairakana posture always has the hands with the right on top of the left with the thumbs touching. And then we have our back very straight, like a stack of coins, it is set. Our shoulders in a comfortable position that kind of allows our arms to bow out. And then our head slightly tilted forward, our eyes slightly open, pointed at our nose, and then our tongue behind our teeth with our mouth in a comfortable position. So we have our legs, our hands, our back, our shoulders, our head, our eyes, and then our mouth in a comfortable position with our tongue on the top. And then we begin to breathe in and out and focus solely on the breath. We come here with so many different sorts of attachments and aversions and minds that are very busy, that our mind leads us around by the nose, and we're going from one affliction to the another. And with doing the meditation on the breath, we're able to kind of focus our mind back into something that's more realistic, more neutral, from which we can grow Dharma practice from. So let's just begin by focusing on the breath for a minute or so. Let's begin by thinking about suffering in general. Thinking about the various sufferings that we've had to endure, recognizing that these aren't things that we want. Thinking about the manifest sufferings, such as headaches, illnesses, losing loved ones, meeting with things we don't want to, aging, becoming sick, eventually having to pass away. We meditate on the various forms of things that we find happy and recognize that any contaminated happiness, because of impermanence, transforms into a form of suffering. When we analyze what we think is happiness in this life, we see that it has a self-destruct mechanism within it that eventually causes us to suffer. And that it's like the bait that keeps us in cyclic existence, that keeps us coming back for more. And then we recognize that we have to be born again and again and again into this state beyond our control and experience all of these types of suffering. We start to think about those we care about and think about them having to endure those types of suffering. We think about those who are neutral to us and that they have to endure all of those types of suffering. And then we think of those beings that we name as enemies that have no stable status as an enemy to us. In previous lives, they were as kind to us as the kindest person we've ever known. Kindness from a year ago is kindness. Kindness from a lifetime ago is kindness. So we recognize that every being has been so kind to us, even if we at this time call them our enemy. It's because we're misunderstanding things. When we think about these beings that have been so kind to us having to experience the sufferings just mentioned, and that just like ourselves, all sentient beings want to have happiness. Just like ourselves, all sentient beings want to be free from suffering. And we recognize that the Buddha has taught us how to be free from suffering altogether and to achieve infinite happiness. And we think how nice it would be if all sentient beings could have infinite happiness. And wouldn't it be nice if we could play a role in that? Since they've been so kind to us. But unfortunately, at this time, we have afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience, just like they do. But at this moment, we have a pathway which will allow us to become capable of helping them and capable of bringing us to a state of infinite happiness, bliss. And we recognize that we must become a Buddha in order to fulfill our needs and other sentient beings' needs, in order to get rid of all the afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience, or the cognitive obstructions that's necessary. for us to become Buddhas. And although we have Buddha potential, we haven't matured it yet. We haven't matured ourselves into a fully enlightened being. In order for that maturation to take place, that maturity to ripen, we have to engage in practice. We have to hear the Dharma, analyze the Dharma, and meditate on the Dharma. So it's for the purpose of becoming a Buddha that we are here this evening. For the sake of everyone, for the sake of all sentient beings that are so high in number, we can't even count that high. Our little minds can't imagine how many sentient beings there are. And we're here for their sake. We're reciting the Heart Sutra. We're engaging in all the prayers and reflection on the prayers for the sake of becoming Buddhas. There's no greater purpose for us to do anything than to become a Buddha. And here we are this evening with an opportunity to do all of the things that are necessary to become a Buddha and learn all of the things that are necessary to become a Buddha. So as we set our motivation and recognize that we're here for the sake of all sentient beings so that we can become a Buddha, let's begin with the recitations of the Heart Sutra. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of karmas, no mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way, Teata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. Thus, Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Ngala jube ne jodan ba ne nguje du chunga yi du do chen rupa bola ma yi bu shin si ne zong an ro so la sha zi lo aga samara ta shanda ra samara ya Aga samara dashanara samara vedi adong gade gade baragade barazangati badiso baba ganju sanjika itimitoji vadoji mevadoji shivadoji jagi baji metin bisho tanji shetin kori so agirin donja aji shiva dam midun nube jana dewa dam tumba junji monzon zonjoji dashi dejan denda dele jo. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Gam Niradayami. Nanye Jananda Ye Janala Janju Badu Danye Jasuji. Dagi Jinye Ji Bezonanji Jala Benji Zanye Rubasho. Sanye Jananda Ye Janala Janju Badu Danye Jasuji. Dagi Jinye Ji Bezonanji Jala Benji Zanye Jubasho. Sanje Jananda Ye Janala Janju Badu Danye Jasuji. Dagi Jishini Bezonanji Jala Benji Zanye Jubasho. May this teaching be understood in the language of all beings. Okay, so here we are again. We're all still kicking, so that's a good thing. We're still walking around and breathing and have an opportunity to become bodhisattvas. So that's the key theme of this evening. And we learned why it's so important to be a bodhisattva, because it's the only door into the Mahayana. And if we want to become a Buddha, then we have to become a bodhisattva, because the Buddhas are caused by the bodhisattvas. According to all of the great texts, and Chandrakirti really expresses that very clearly in the beginning of the Madhyamika Avatara. So if we would like to seek liberation of a Buddha, then it's necessary to do the things that the Buddha did to become a Buddha. And the entrance into the thing that makes it possible is called Bodhicitta, or Mahayana mind generation, as it's sometimes called. So let's get right into the text. But before we do, actually, let's read a quote from Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Duden that kind of expresses the excellent qualities of bodhicitta, and maybe it will make us a little bit excited to get into this text. Ever enhancing your enlightened motive of bodhicitta is the mainstay for the supreme vehicle's path. It is the basis and foundation for the great waves of altruistic conduct to bring you to enlightenment. Like a gold-making elixir, it turns everything you do into the two collections, building up a treasure of merit gathered from infinitely collected virtues. Knowing this, the bodhisattvas have held this supreme precious mind as their innermost mental bond. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. if you would also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. So Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, this is what I have done. If you would like what I have realized, if you'd like to have the achievements that I have had, please cultivate yourself in this way. So he begins by saying that we have to, if we look at it in terms of the teachings for beings of three capacities, we first have to find disgust and want to be free from the lower realms of cyclic existence. And then we have to understand that even the higher realms of cyclic existence are plagued with suffering. We're in them right now. We can see that very clearly. We're in the lowest among the higher realms of cyclic existence, but we are in the higher realms of cyclic existence. And if we want to find suffering, we needn't look very much further than a day in our lives. So it's pretty convincing that maybe the upper realms are plagued with suffering, and it'd be nice to be free from those things as well. And so at the medium scope level, the practitioner wants to get out of cyclic existence altogether. And then at the great scope level is where we begin this bodhicitta motivation. It's a practitioner who recognizes that just getting out of cyclic existence altogether for yourself does not take care of all sentient beings who also have these sufferings. And that the only way to Buddhahood is by practicing the teachings that are for beings of great capacity that begin with this entrance of bodhicitta, this thing that allows, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, it's like a gold-making elixir that turns everything into virtue. So when we looked at the previous teaching that we had on bodhicitta, we saw that once you got it, day and night, whatever you do, even when you're a little distracted or maybe even sleeping, you're accumulating the virtues to become a Buddha. And that is something that's very, very impressive because I know that when I go throughout my day, I can say that is probably not the case. So if I become a bodhisattva, I can continuously create virtue. And we know that the Buddha had to collect merit for 3 countless eons once he achieved bodhicitta. And had to collect enormous amounts of merit in order to achieve bodhicitta. So knowing that we have to achieve enormous amounts of merit to achieve realize bodhicitta, and then after we get bodhicitta, we have to accumulate enormous amounts of merit in order to become a Buddha. We see that wouldn't it be great if we had this mind that was only accumulating virtue, because it would fast track us and it would allow us then to practice the things that it serves as its foundation of, such as Tantrayana. And if we want to get to Buddhahood on, as Rinpoche said, an airplane instead of driving a car, we have to practice Tantrayana. But in order to do that, we need this foundation of bodhicitta, because there won't be any results from our practice if we don't. So it's so, so important that we look at these things as indispensable in our practice. So let's get into the text, and then we can kind of scan through some other things and make some sense out of bodhicitta. And we're in a very exciting section. Now we're in the specific causes of bodhicitta. So we're going to get into the actual meditation instructions, or the actual practices that will allow our minds to turn from a mind that cherishes itself and thinks of itself all the time, and will, by any means necessary, find happiness for itself, no matter how many other sentient beings it needs to step on, and converting that to a mind that cherishes other sentient beings in that same powerful way. So imagine the kind of transformation that would take to take a mind that only thinks about itself, cherishes itself so much, into a mind that has that power of cherishing others. It would really take something powerful to do that. And the meditations that are taught within the specific causes for bodhicitta in this text are just incredible. And we'll get to what those are in just one moment. But let's go over the general outline in Panchen Sonon Drapa's general meaning of perfection. Right now, again, just to remind ourselves of all of these categories. So the first category of the 5 is called base. So we learned that when we look at this word base, it just means like what base would be necessary from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint in order to have the 2 types of bodhicitta occur. aspiring bodhicitta, and engaged bodhicitta. So aspiring bodhicitta is a desire to become a Buddha for the sake of sentient beings. And engaged bodhicitta, again, is that desire to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings that's been reinforced and then combined with the vow of the bodhisattva vow. So once someone takes the bodhisattva vow, then he or she becomes, their bodhicitta goes from aspirational bodhicitta to engaged bodhicitta. And they become bodhisattvas as soon as they have aspiring bodhicitta, but they don't have an engaged bodhicitta until they take the bodhisattva vow. So we went through that. We won't get into the technical details that surround that at this point, but we went over that very clearly, and anybody who's new watching this can go back to Bodhicitta Class 1. It's on YouTube, and you can very, very clearly, we went in depth in that section into the physical base, and then the class number 2, I think we went into the mental, physical base again, and mental base, so that if you follow these classes in order, you will find details on each one of these sections as we go through them. So I encourage everyone who hasn't to go back and look at those classes in order to have a real serious foundation with some of these categories, because we won't go over them in full detail every single class, because that would be, a waste of people's time in some sense that would like to move forward when the material is already present and you can just watch it over and over again if you're looking to familiarize yourself or remember what it said with that information. So that we went over physical and mental base for achieving the aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. Then we went over cause. We found out that there's general cause, and in that category, there's causes, conditions, and powers. So we needed generally to awaken the lineage of the great vehicle and have a spiritual friend that takes care of us, be under the influence of love and compassion. We had to be willing to endure the hardship for others as a cause. Conditions, we needed to see the inconceivable power of the bodhisattva. We needed to repeatedly hear the scriptural basket of the bodhisattva. We needed to not want to be able to bear the decline of the Mahayana and see the rarity of mind generation during this degenerate time. And then the power that would allow it to rise was our own power, the power of others, the power of meditation, and the power of application. So we went over these pretty specifically. And then today I spoke with Geshe-la and I asked him, in the text, what are the, general, so these are the general causes for aspiring bodhicitta. So we have causes, conditions, and powers. So Geshe-la said to me this morning that, first of all, so it's very funny. I want to tell a story. So I go downstairs very early in the morning. I had left a message with Geshe-la, and because of Sakar Dawa, Geshe Aga is the Drepung Losaling chanting master. So you can only imagine how busy he was during Sakar Dawa with all the prayer ceremonies and all of the pujas going on. So I had left a message for him with I said I have a couple questions, and I gave him generally the questions that I had. So I got up this morning quite early. I don't know exactly what time it was, and I went downstairs to start my day. I make first thing I do is get up, and I try to think of impermanence and try to think of the reason that I'm engaging in Buddhist practice, and try to generate some sort of a motivation right when I get up. And by thinking about impermanence, that reminds me to get in gear. It reminds me that death will come, I don't know when, and the only thing that's going to help me is Dharma. And I try to reflect a little bit on that, and then reflect upon the teachings that we're hearing about tonight. And then I go downstairs and I make prostrations. So that's my kind of morning ritual. And I go downstairs into Rinpoche's old room where his altar is, and now his picture is on it instead of him being there, unfortunately. And I open that door and I make prostrations. So I get done with making my prostrations, and all of a sudden I hear ding, and it's my WhatsApp, and it's Geshe Aga from India, and it's this big long voice message. And it's like an entire teaching on the section we've already gone over, all the way up to the end of the specific causes section. He's just in his room with his text, just teaching it. And then, I was so happy. It was just kind of like this magical moment that occurred, right? I literally got up from making prostrations and it was like, ding. And so I started listening to it. And then he and I went back and forth for maybe a half an hour or so. And really, I got to the bottom of some things, but specifically I was looking at, when we look at these general causes of the aspiring bodhicitta, what are the general causes of the engaged bodhicitta? Is there a section on that? He said, first of all, Tsutrimla. He calls me Tsutrim and sometimes Jeff. But when I was in India, and Rinpoche, when I thought about going forward to be ordained, Rinpoche gave me the name Lobsang Tsutrim. So when I went to India, all of the people in India know me as Lobsang Tsutrim. They don't know me as Jeff. So sometimes, if you hear anyone around calling me that, that's the reason they call me that, Tsutrim. It's not because Tsutrim means ethics. When we look at the perfection of ethics, Tsutrim is the name. Now, they aren't calling me that because I have the perfection of ethics. I can promise you that, or that I'm really just so incredibly ethical. It's something that I would aspire so much to have. So, yeah. So, and when you hear these names, most of the time that lamas give you a name, it's an aspirational name. It isn't saying, oh, we really think this student's really, nailed this. It's usually an aspirational name. So Rinpoche first said, maybe we'll name you like the enlightened activities, Lobsang Tile, because his name's Lobsang. So you take on the name of the ordination master, the first name, so Lobsang. And then he said, maybe enlightened activities. Then he said, I think Tsutrim. So it was first like Lobsang Tile, and then Tsutrim. So anyway, short story about naming. So he said, first of all, you need to understand that these are just some of the causes and conditions and powers that are going to be necessary for you to get aspiring bodhicitta. So within all of these points, if you wanted to, be taken care of by a spiritual friend or awaken the lineage of the great vehicle, there would be so much presupposed there, right? So many causes that were necessary to come into being in order for all of these other things to happen. So he said, don't think that you're just having to, these, 12 things, all you have to do is these 12 things and somehow that will magically make bodhicitta occur. You have to have all of the precepts, all of the teachings shared in common with beings of small capacity, all the teachings shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and then start to look at all of these things that are mentioned in causes and conditions and powers, because they are all arise from those other precepts. So it's important to look at that. It's important to understand what the preliminary causes for even these general causes and conditions and powers are. And we'll find that there are no steps that we can leave out. We'll find that we have to engage in all of the practices for small and medium capacity in order for us to realize the great capacity teaching. So, so he said, once you have all of these conditions present, causes, conditions, and powers present to have the arisal of the aspiring mind, then these also serve as the causes and conditions and powers for the arisal of the engaged mind, because we learned that in order to have the mental basis for engaged bodhicitta, we needed the aspiring mind. So of course, if we need the aspiring bodhicitta to get engaged bodhicitta, then we would need all of aspiring bodhicitta's causes and conditions and powers. And then we would take all of those things that allowed us to arise the aspirational bodhicitta, and then we would have someone give us the bodhisattva vow. And then once we took that vow, then we would have engaged bodhicitta. So these were how it was explained with the general kind of points that were necessary in order to have the engaged bodhicitta. So it's very similar to what the mental base is. You need aspiring bodhicitta. You have to be on the path of accumulation in order to get engaged bodhicitta. Now we move on to the specific root causes, the Sawe Ju Chedrak, it's called. So the specific root causes of achieving this mind that aspires to enlightenment. What are these specific root causes? So when we look in the Parshin Chittun, it says there's two lineages of instructions that will bring about bodhicitta. Two lineages of meditation instruction. And what are those two lineages? So there is the extensive deeds lineage that is passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Lord Maitreya to Master Asanga. And that particular teaching is called the 7-point cause and effect instruction for achieving the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So Lord Buddha gave this teaching to Maitreya, who gave it to Lord Asanga. And we'll get into the story of that in a moment. It's a very, very beautiful story about how this occurs. And something very interesting that I'm sure I'd read a million times, but I believe the 42nd Sakya Treason, it's on our Facebook, Tara Mantra, on Sakardawa gave a wonderful teaching on the 12 deeds of the Buddha. When we see the first deed, the descent from Tushita heaven, he explained that in Tushita, the bodhisattvas were all very sad that Buddha was leaving Tushita because he was their teacher. And he said, don't worry. And he took off his crown. He had on a crown at the time. And he said, your new teacher is Lord Maitreya. He will be the future Buddha. And then put his crown on Lord Maitreya's head. So you can see that according to this particular story, Lord Maitreya was Buddha Shakyamuni's student in this particular context. And so then we say that Buddha Shakyamuni gave these teachings of the 7-point cause and effect instruction to Maitreya. Then Buddha Shakyamuni made Lord Maitreya the kind of Dharma holder of Tushita heaven. And then Buddha Shakyamuni came to our world and then was born in a noble family, et cetera, et cetera. You can study the 12 deeds of the Buddha. It's a very beautiful teaching for another time, though. So the particular teaching of the 7-point cause and effect was passed down through the extensive deeds lineage from Buddha Shakyamuni to Lord Maitreya to Asanga, and then down through various teachers, and then it lands at Lord Atisha. Let's start there. And then we have the equalizing and exchanging self with others practice that's passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Manjushri to Arya Nagarjuna to Shantideva, and then all the way down to Lord Atisha. So Lord Atisha is very, very special for the reason that he was able to combine all the lineages and understand all of the lineages and be able to make it a clear instructions for a practice that we could combine. So Atisha held the extensive deeds lineage, the profound view lineage, and then the special tantric lineage of blessings that was passed down from Vajradhara, who is Buddha Shakyamuni in his tantric form. So Vajradhara is Buddha Shakyamuni taking on the form of a tantric master, where he gave the tantric teachings. He's called Vajradhara. And Vajradhara passed them down to Tilo, Naropa, and then we see all the wonderful masters, Milarepa, and all these incredible beings passed down that ends up at Lord Atisha as well. So Lord Atisha holds all of these lineages and shows us how to put all of these lineages into a combined practice to swiftly become Buddhas. And then Lord Atisha passes it down to the 3 Kadampa lineages, and then eventually both of those things all end up at Lama Tsongkhapa. And Lama Tsongkhapa is a holder of all of these excellent instructions of the extensive deeds lineage, the profound view lineage, and the lineage of blessings. Looking tonight specifically at the 7-point cause and effect instruction that was passed down from Shakyamuni Buddha to Lord Maitreya, to Master Asanga. How does such a thing occur? Why does this occur? Why is Asanga no Lord Maitreya? You know, Asanga is a teacher, an Indian pandit. You know, you can look up the historical dates. You know, I'm not great at that, as everyone knows. I don't want to miss a date or give it the wrong way, because it's, you know, information that can be easily looked up. But Asanga is an Indian pandit who decided that he wanted to meet Lord Maitreya. He wanted to develop great compassion. He wanted to meet the future Buddha in person. So Master Asanga at this point is an incredible, understands the Dharma incredibly, but hasn't been able to generate this awakening mind, has some sort of obstacles. So Asanga goes into a cave to meditate, and says that I am not going to leave here until I realize bodhicitta. So Asanga goes into the cave, I'm sorry, until I meet with Lord Maitreya. I apologize. So Asanga goes into the cave and begins to earnestly practice day and night to try to meet with the future Buddha, Lord Maitreya. And he's engaging in everything he knows how to do. And after 3 years, he gets very discouraged. And he leaves the cave. And as he's leaving the cave, he looks over at the side of it, and there's a little bird's nest area or something. And he sees a bird flying in and out. And he notices that on the side of the rock, the wings that have touched it from going over and over, maybe generations of, you know, we have to look, you know, maybe generations have lived in this nest of birds, who knows? But he notices by this bird flying in and out that just the feathers touching the rock over and over and over again were able to leave a mark in the rock. And he thought to himself, well, through repeated effort, something as hard as a rock can be penetrated by a feather. So maybe I need to put in more effort. So he says, you know, okay, I'm going to go back in the cave. I'll put in a little more effort. I'm not going to give up just yet. So he goes back in the cave, and he still isn't really having this, you know, he's not meeting Maitreya. He's invoking Maitreya. He's saying, please come to me, Maitreya. Please be present. I need to be your student. He wants to be able to receive teachings from Maitreya. He feels that there's some need that he has for this specific being to teach him. So he's relentless until he gets to the 6th year. So now we're 3 years, he goes back in the cave. So now he does another 3 years in the cave and says to himself, okay, I don't think this is working. I must be doing something wrong. This is just, maybe it was a futile effort on my part. You know, maybe I just had delusions of grandeur. Who am I to think I could meet Lord Maitreya? You know, I think I put in enough effort. Time's up. I'm out of here. So he leaves, and he's leaving, and he looks over. You know, he's in a cave, so there's rocks all around him. And he looks kind of a little bit afar, and he notices that there's a pool of water, and that this pool of water has occurred because as raindrops have fallen, or maybe there's drops of water coming from, I've heard this told so many different ways, but basically there's a drip of water happening over and over and over again, whether it's from rain over the years, or there's something dripping from a specific place on a rock, tap, 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 tap. It's caused the rock to be indented and caused the water to pool in it. So he said to himself, if something like water can dent a rock, then, you know, maybe my mind, you know, needs to be penetrated more. You know, maybe this hard head of mine, right? Maybe this, you know, hard continuum of mine just hasn't become soft enough, hasn't become pliable enough for me to be able to realize Maitreya in person. So he goes back into the cave, and he starts to meditate. He's invoking Maitreya, please come to me. I need your instructions for practice. And all the while he's doing other things too, you know, doing all of the practices of accumulation and generating merit, and engaging in, whatever practices he can at his scope at that point. I don't find a lot of detail on his scope in this story ever. So we won't add it, but we have to assume he was a great being, if he's going into a cave to find Lord Maitreya, right? If he's got the conviction enough as a Buddhist to go sit in a cave for 3 years, then 6 years, he's got to be a pretty serious practitioner. So he goes back in, but still he doesn't see Maitreya. Now he's 9 years in, another 3 years pass, and he is fed up. I mean, each of these times he leaves, he's a little more fed up. And he starts walking. He gets out of like the rock area and starts to kind of walk to town. And he's like, I've given up, thanks, but I can't do this any longer because I don't think it's working. He's smart. He's not going to waste his time. So he gets, a little bit away from where he's meditating, and he comes upon a man. He's outside his house. There's different ways the story is told. But he has these pieces of iron, and he has cotton in his other hand. Sometimes they say it's a feather, but cotton, in his other hand. And he's going like this, to the iron. And he catches the attention of a Sangha, and a Sangha says, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm making needles. And a Sangha says, this guy must be crazy. This doesn't make any sense. You can't sharpen iron with cotton. So he says to the man, what are you doing? He says, well, why are you doing it this way? He goes, oh, because it works. Here's a box of needles I've already made. Look, here's some needles I've already made. It works. It just takes more effort. But the more and more I do it, they get sharper. And look at this box I have. Do these look like they're not needles? Don't tell me I can't make needles like this. So then he says, if something as hard as iron can be sharpened to a point with something as soft as cotton or a feather, then my mind maybe just hasn't been given enough time to mature. So he goes back into the cave and he puts in every amount of effort he thinks that he can possibly put in, day and night. He's not sleeping. He's just putting in effort to meet Maitreya. He gets to 12 years. Now, he's been in a cave 12 years for one reason, to meet Maitreya. And I believe it's to receive the teachings on compassion and bodhicitta. But he receives all of the teachings later on. So, it may fit within the story, but let's just say he wants to meet Maitreya to be able to receive the teachings to become a Buddha. And we know the entrance to Mahayana is bodhicitta, and you can't become a Buddha without bodhicitta. So it makes sense when the story is told that he's trying to realize this mind. So he gets to the 12th year, and he's actually a little mad at this point. Fed up, like super fed up. And he thinks he's wasted all this time. And he knows death and impermanence, right? He knows that our precious human life will not always be here necessarily. And what we're going to be thrown into in our next life is uncertain, and if we're a bug, we're going to have a real hard time meeting Maitreya. We're going to have a real hard time practicing Dharma. And he worried that he had just wasted a lot of time. Became so sad and mad at the same time, frustrated. So he leaves the cave, and as he gets out of the cave, now this is a great being. This is a being who's practiced love and compassion, engaged in practices that would only allow for this to happen. So he comes upon a dog, and this dog is laying there and is suffering and sick. And the dog's whole half hind is full of maggots and bleeding. And the dog is dying because it's being eaten alive by maggots, and the dog is extremely sick. So suddenly, a Sangha's temperament changes. He can only think of the dog and how much it's suffering. But then he starts to think of the bugs that need the nourishment. and he wants to remove the bugs from the dog, but knows that the bugs need to eat. And he generates this compassion, this love that he wants the bugs to be happy and the dog to be happy. And he generates compassion that he wants the bugs to be free of suffering, and the dog to be free of suffering. And he realizes he must now be very skillful. How can he nourish these maggots? And how can he not hurt the dog? And how, but what to do? So then Asanga cuts a piece of his own flesh and throws it on the ground, cuts it out of his leg and throws it on the ground, and then bends down to start to try to take out the maggots from the dog, and realizes that if he uses his hands, he may kill the bugs. His hands aren't really always so sure how tight something can be squeezed without hurting it, or if you're going to suffocate something without hurting it. And he knows that if he's touching the dog's wounds with his hands, it'll hurt the dog a lot. So he uses his mind. He's already cut a piece of his flesh that he's going to put the bugs onto so they have something to eat. But he doesn't know how to take them out without hurting the bugs or the dog. So he has this epiphany that he must use his mouth, because his mouth is the softest thing that he has, his lips and his tongue. And this is the softest thing. And we even see that our mothers have used this when they had to, sometimes when we were very much babies, they used their mouths on our face to even sometimes, clean our noses, because it's the softest part, and babies' skin are very, very susceptible to feeling like scratchiness. So Asanga has this epiphany that our kind mothers have even, wiped our noses with their own mouths, and bends down to start to remove these maggots from the dog with his mouth. And the story goes that as he starts to remove these sentient beings from the hind of the dog with his mouth, that his face hits the ground, smashes into the ground. And he can't figure out how such a thing has happened, because he was just inside of a dog's, body, hind, pulling these bugs out. And when he gets up, because his face hits the ground to look, rainbow of lights are there, and Lord Maitreya is standing there. And Asanga then gets a little bit perturbed. He says, I've been in the cave 12 years meditating on you. And now you come? I've been calling your name for 12 years. And Maitreya looks at him and says, I've been there the whole time. I was in the cave the moment you started asking for me to come. But you had karmic obscurations. You weren't able to see me. Ordinary appearances aren't always what they seem. A hungry ghost sees a river full of pus, and a god sees a river full of nectar, and a human sees a river full of water. This is all because of a mind that is projecting that karmically. And your karma was projecting the lack of presence of Maitreya while Maitreya was always here. And when you generated love and compassion for that sentient being, and you were willing to do what no one would really, really want to do, that's what it took to purify that karma that disallowed you from seeing me. So then Asanga says, I'm gonna put it to a test. And Maitreya says, well, let me just show you, and brings him in the cave and said, well, this is where you spit one time, and this is where you did this. And he starts recounting things to show Asanga that he was there. And then Asanga says, well, I'm not sure. And he puts Maitreya on his shoulders and he says, I'm going to bring you to town and see if everyone can see you, because I can see you now. And I can only believe that ordinary appearances seem normal, So I'm going to bring you to town. And if everybody can see that Maitreya is here, it just means you just showed up. So he goes to town and he starts running around, and everyone thinks he's crazy because no one sees anyone on his shoulders. No one can see a thing. And then it says there's someone who must have had great merit that sees a dog on his shoulder. And then there's this being who's pretty realized that can see just a limb of Maitreya. So then Asanga is convinced that it was his own karma and afflictions that made him not be able to perceive the future Buddha. And then he takes Maitreya's hand and says, please guide me. And then Maitreya takes him to Tashida and teaches him all of the teachings of Maitreya that we have when we look at, for instance, the Abhisama Alamkara ornament, Maitreya's ornament for clear realization. When we look at this 7-point cause and effect, when we look at all of these instructions, these were all given to Master Asanga in Tashida by Lord Maitreya. So Asanga stays a day in Tashida, gets all of these teachings, comes back to Earth and realizes 50 Earth years have passed. It's 50 years later. So one day in this Tashida realm is the equivalent of 50 years. So he has this, immense amount of instruction that Lord Maitreya has given, and then he presents these texts of Lord Maitreya to the world, the various treatises and texts of Lord Maitreya. So this is the story of where this instruction comes from. It comes from great love. It comes from great compassion. It comes from a being who was willing to do anything to become a Buddha. And this is the similar attitude that we should try our best to generate, this attitude that's willing to do anything to become a Buddha. When we see the excellent qualities of the Bodhisattva, we see the excellent qualities of the Buddha. We did a whole class on, the bodies of a Buddha, the Dharmakaya and the Sambhukaya and the Nirmanakaya, and what a Buddha is capable of doing, and what an excellent being that Buddha is. And the Buddha has those excellent qualities of mind, of being able to understand conventional and ultimate truth simultaneously. And the Buddha is able to have unbiased love and compassion for all sentient beings, and knows exactly what they need because he or she is omniscient. So imagine being omniscient and having love and compassion for all sentient beings, and then having this mind that's able to emanate bodies in whatever form those sentient beings would need in order to be happy forever, and in order to be shown how to be happy forever, should we say. Because the Buddhas don't wash away the sins with water, the Buddha said. They don't take the suffering away with their hands. They don't give you their realizations. They teach the truth of the Dharma so that sentient beings can be freed. We have to do the work. But the work that we're doing is so that we can become them. We can become Taras. We can become Chenrezis. We can become not that specific Buddha, because we'll be our own Buddha, but we can become Buddhas just like they are. So when we do these tantric practices that we read about, we're imagining ourselves as specific Buddhas so that we can become our own Buddha. So each Buddha has its own individual continuum. It's not like we just morph into the Buddha. If we were speaking of emptiness and saying, things aren't truly established, so that must happen, well, that would mean that you were me. And that's not the case. We have separate continuums. And that same continuum will be what becomes ripened and will have its own Buddha identity. It'll be, who knows what the name would be. If Rinpoche, has, maybe it's Lobsang Sutrim, maybe in the future, I'm the Buddha Lobsang Sutrim. Rinpoche gave a name that I aspire to be. maybe that's the name, right? So eventually there'll be this Buddha, we'll call it Lobsang Sutrim, but it won't be the same continuum as Maitreya, Chenrezig, Tara, Guis. These are all separate continuums. So that's very important to understand, that we are not all one. We all have one nature, which is empty. You know, so the nature of a rock and the nature of Jeff are the same because of dependent origination. We're both empty, right? But a rock and and Jeff are obviously separate things in terms of conventional reality. Okay, so let's get into the 7-point cause and effect for realizing bodhicitta. So whenever we look at the causes for bodhicitta, we find this instruction, or the equalizing, exchanging self with others instruction, as I mentioned. And it always begins with equanimity. Okay, equanimity or impartiality towards living beings. So when we look at equanimity, there are different kinds of equanimity that we can posit. If we're looking at it in terms of immeasurable equanimity in the 4 immeasurables, may all sentient beings live in equanimity free from attachment and aversion. There are 2 types. First, that it's wishing that living beings are free from the afflictions, such as attachment and hostility. And the second kind is being even-minded yourself after you have become free of attachment or hostility towards living beings. So the equanimity that we're talking about here is the even-mindedness towards all sentient beings. And what types of beings do we use as objects of observation to know if we are working on or have this even-mindedness? And the types of persons are friends, enemies, and neutrals. So we went over this previously in another class, and we know that when we look at how we react when we think about those different types of beings, we have very, very, very different reactions. When we think of a stranger or a neutral person to us, not much happens. You know, not much happens in our mind. If we think of someone that we're very attached to, like a friend or a loved one, we see what happens in our mind. It becomes very clinging. We want to really do everything we can for them, and only them, and specifically them, because we think they have this very, very specific status as a friend or a loved one. But when we look at the uncertainty of our previous lives, we see that they have not always been our friends. It says in the daughter, like the finest moon's discourse sutra, formerly I have killed all of you, and you have slashed and dismembered me. All of us have been mutual enemies and killed one another. How could you be attached? So it's getting a more realistic reaction towards those we're very attached to, and understanding that in previous lives, they were our kind of dear friends and loved ones. So the pre-step to equanimity, really, Rinpoche always said, has to be the understanding of previous lives. Because without this understanding, the rest of this equanimity and then 7-point cause and effect instruction does not work. We absolutely have to believe in previous lives in order for this stuff to kind of work. So how do you do this? So you start to look at consciousness, start to look at this moment's consciousness, and in this moment that we're knowing right now, and we know that it came from a previous moment, that came from a previous moment, that came from a previous moment's consciousness. If we look back an hour ago, we can remember some things, not all of them, but we can remember some things that happened an hour ago. We can remember some things that happened 20 years ago. We see that there's a continuum of conscious. So if we start finding, start tracing it back, we see that consciousness has always, previous moment's consciousness has always been a cause for the present moment's consciousness. It didn't come from ever a dissimilar class. We see that consciousness and kind of matter are different. We see that, the tangible objects that can be measured by science, that have atoms and all of these things that can be measured and are findable, are very different than consciousness. So consciousness has to come from something of a similar class, not from a dissimilar class, as it says in the Pramanavartika Karika by Dharmakirti. The class has to be the same. When we see cause and effect, we know that results are concordant with their causes. And non-consciousness has never been able to give rise to consciousness. And likewise, milk has never been able to give rise to chocolate milk, right? You needed milk as a participant in the making of chocolate milk. So you needed a concordant cause. And likewise, consciousness needs concordant causes in order to arise. So we see that this moment came from a previous moment, and then we can trace consciousness back to when we're born. We can be certain of that. But that moment's consciousness had to come from something else. That moment of birth consciousness can't arise from a dissimilar class. It couldn't arise from an external source that was different from it. It had to come from something that was similar. So we look at where it was then, and we see that according to Buddhist scripture and logic, that it was in the intermediate state in a very subtle form. This very, very subtle form of consciousness in this intermediate state that is abiding, that was caused by the previous life. So you start tracing back that moment's consciousness, a previous moment's consciousness in the intermediate state, and trace it back to the beginning of the intermediate state. You have to say that that came from somewhere. And then we see that the intermediate state is caused by death. Death is caused by a being with a consciousness dying. So that consciousness we see is now some sort of continuum. It has to be a continuum. And when we start to try to find a beginning to that continuum, we have the inability to do so logically. So we start tracing it back, and we see that these consciousnesses were caused by previous consciousness, previous life's consciousness, previous intermediate states, previous lives, previous intermediate states, previous lives, and we come with this beginningless cycle. So we start there with this idea that we've had these beginningless lives, and that consciousness will continue to move forward. So at this present moment, our consciousness is contaminated. It's not pure. But our consciousness is not in the nature of impurity. When we look at the definition, it says that which is clear and knowing. So it can know stuff, but it doesn't have a nature that's this or that. It's just clear. It's not defiled. Its nature is not defiled. Those are adventitious things, those stains. So that can be matured. So this consciousness that we're abiding in right now is the consciousness that will eventually become a Buddha, as we just mentioned. So we start with this idea that we have beginningless lives and that we will have infinite future lives. And now we're starting to determine what those will look like if we're practicing. If we engage in virtue, those will look like happiness. If we engage in non-virtue, those future lives will look like unhappiness. And if we want infinite happiness, then we're going to need some special infinite happiness making causes. And Bodhicitta is the infinite making happiness cause. So we know that we have to get it. And we recognize, if we've been born since beginningless time, that all sentient beings have had so many different relationships with us. It allows us, when we start to become attached to our friends and attached to certain relationships, to understand that it wasn't always like that. We need to put, those beings in our meditation on an equal playing field with an enemy, because in a previous life, our enemy was just as kind to us as those that we find to be the kindest to us in this particular life. There isn't any certainty when it comes to sentient beings because of these beginningless lives we've had. And if someone was kind to us, say a year ago, because it was last year, we wouldn't say, oh, they're not kind because it was last year. So how could it make sense if we are have this same continuum if we were to say they weren't kind because it was last life? So we start to apply the same logic. And so we start to kind of beat down our attachment by understanding that we need to have an equal response to our friends because there's no certainty about how they've been. It's not realistic for us to just grab onto this being and hold so tightly to them because they don't have that nature of being only our friend. They don't possess that only our friend nature. And when we hate them or have aversion towards them, they've been extremely kind to us in the past. And we look at what makes someone an enemy. Sometimes it's as much as they may have gave us a dirty look. And then we label them as this horrible being when they've been incredibly kind beyond our imagination to us before. We've just forgotten. So they give us a dirty look and we decide they're an enemy. How unrealistic is that? Or they shout something we don't like. And we decide because they've affected us in some way that they're an enemy. But if we look at beginningless time, we'll find out that they've had every relationship with us possible. And we start to try to get an equal desire to benefit strangers, friends, and enemies. We take those labels off and we make them all beings that we would like to equally, we would be able to equally benefit. We wouldn't, if it was a stranger, we wouldn't kind of disregard them. If it was a friend, we wouldn't try to help them more. And if they were an enemy, we wouldn't be less likely to help them. So equanimity means we would equally be capable of and wanting to benefit these types of beings. So this is the most essential precept to the 7-point cause and effect for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment. It's absolutely essential that we have this precept. And this is, once we have this precept, then we can start to try to have affection for those beings. It makes it a lot easier. It makes us those objects of observation that we previously labeled as friends, enemies, and neutrals to become objects of our affection. It makes it possible. So once we get to the point where we have this more realistic understanding of sentient beings that we relate to, then we're able to start to have affection for them. So how do we do that? So now we're going to get into how we do that. So when we look at the 7-point cause and effect for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment, the first 3, steps are in order to develop that affection for sentient beings. The last 3 steps, which are, so let me go back. I think to make it clearer, just so when we look at the 7-point cause and effect for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment, there are 6 causes and 1 result. The result is the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So when we say the 7-point cause and effect instruction for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment, there are 6 causes and 1 result. So that's why there are 7. So the result is Bodhicitta, the mind that aspires to enlightenment. So within those 6 causes, 3 of the causes are for developing affection for sentient beings, according to Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment. So those first 3 causes are for developing affection. So what are those 3 causes? Recognizing sentient beings as our mothers, remembering their kindness, and wishing to repay their kindness. So these are the steps to generating affection towards all beings. And then the next steps are steps to generate an attitude of being intent on others' welfare. So those steps are love through the force of attraction, great compassion, and the extraordinary attitude. So there are causes of that final result, bodhicitta, are broken into two categories. Those causes that make you have affection for all living beings, and then those causes that want you to be intent on, have an attitude that is intent on their welfare. So let's begin with this first step of having affection for all sentient beings. So this first step of recognizing all sentient beings as our mother. First of all, how can we posit such a thing? Well, since beginningless time, we've been born again and again and again and again. We've been professional dyers, and we've been born as bugs. We've been born in the highest peak of existence, and we've been born in the lowest realm of the hell realm, and the hungry ghost realms and animal realms. We've had all of these different experiences throughout our lifetimes. And we've had, in many of those circumstances, we have had mothers that have been so kind to us. So when we look at the times that we've circled in cyclic existence, we've had kind mothers, we've had kind fathers, we've had people who've had every kind of relationship of kindness with us that we can imagine. So in the text, it says, take this idea of mother as your object of observation to do this meditation, but you can use any being that creates the strongest sense of kindness in your mind. Someone who's been the kindest to you, whatever that being is. The Dalai Lama says you can use that being. I just read it in his commentary on the third Dalai Lama's Lam Rim. He said that whatever being brings about that, oh my God, this person's been so kind to me, whatever you label that relationship is, as your friend, as your dog, as your mother, as your father, as your brother, sister, aunt, uncle, whatever that person is, whatever that person you think has just been the kindest to you. And many will use mother because of, carrying you in their womb and going to have to struggle and for so long, for 9 months, and have to endure the pain and suffering, and then the suffering of the birth that took place, and then the willingness to take care of you and prove it. We're here. Someone had to, when we were just helpless and we were just a baby that just looked like, this bug, in front of you, that was just completely incapable of taking care of itself. Somebody had to take care of you. And usually it was your parents. So that's why you think of this kindness, and you think of all the ways that beings were kind to you. But you can use any type of kindness that invokes something in your mind that works. And that's what this practice is about. It's about changing your mind, doing practices that will work in your mind. So think about whatever being you think about that comes to your mind as having been the kindest type of being to you, and recognize that all sentient beings have had this same kind of relationship with you, have done these same kind things for you, but you've forgotten. So you're thinking of beginningless lives. You're recognizing all the sacrifices these beings have made. So you think about your current person that you're thinking about, and then you think about how previously they were so kind to you. And then you think of other friends and other people who you relate to that you have affection for, and think about how in previous lives they've had these ultimate types of kindness towards you. And now you're building this meditation to be bigger and bigger to eventually end up at all sentient beings. So you start this building block where you're recognizing the kindness of each of these beings. So you start with your friends. So we're going back to these friends, enemies, and neutrals, because we aren't going to assume that you've realized complete equanimity as beginning practitioners. So we have to keep checking. We have to keep checking ourselves and keep working with it, because if we start to have a negative reaction when we're trying to look at, oh, our enemy was so kind to us, and we're like, we have to go back to equanimity practice. We're always checking the mirror of the Dharma to see if it's working, to see if we're really realizing these things. And our reaction in our mind always tells the truth. So we start to try to recognize that more and more beings since beginningless time have been so kind to us. So we start building this up bigger and bigger and bigger. And we then move from friends. So now we have all these friends that we recognize. Then we move on to strangers. You know, we start to think about people on the street and so forth. And then, we're doing really well. We're making it bigger. And then we get to enemies and we check it. And we see where we're at with that. And we recognize that those people have been our mothers, have been our fathers, have been our parents, etc., as we just meditated before. We think of since beginningless time, these beings have been so kind. And we just start building this meditation to be bigger and bigger. And eventually we end up at all sentient beings in our minds have been so kind to us as a mother or as a parent. And we can test this to see if we have realized the first causal step for realizing the mind aspires to enlightenment, a causal step that is causes us to have affection for all beings. When we encounter a being, whether it's human or a bug, and we look at that being and say, oh, they've been so kind to us. That's the measure of the realization. When it just spontaneously arises, it doesn't require us to go, okay, that bug was previously my mother and was so kind to me, and it was so great, and they gave me food, and when she was a dog, she was even willing to risk her own life to give me milk. You see sometimes dogs who are malnourished, who are so skinny because they're willing to just give all their milk to their pups, right? You see that an animal will, go after an animal that will clearly eat it to try to protect its young, right? So we recognize spontaneously that all beings have been that kind to us. And when we, without any kind of thinking necessary, look at any being we encounter, strangers, friends, people we thought are enemies, and say, oh, they've been so kind to me. That's when we've realized this first step. That's what the Lamrim masters say happens, that we encounter all beings. And you see the Dalai Lama, when the Dalai Lama encounters people, you see it. He exudes that. He meets a stranger and it's just like he's meeting his mother. You see it every single time. He has this glow. And when he's walking down aisles and his security is all around him and trying to get him like bumpers to go nowhere near people, there's guards all around him. He can't help himself. And he doesn't know any of these people. I mean, he's the Buddha of compassion and he's omniscient. But if we look at it just in conventional reality, what we can see as a human being, and we take it out of the mystical spiritual, we take it and we look at only what we can see in front of our face as, not so realized folks like myself, we can see this being, no matter who they are, that definitely doesn't have any kind of bias towards, because I've seen His Holiness walk up to Chunglo Ratu Rinpoche, who just passed, who he considered one of his greatest friends, and how his face would light up and how he would feel. And then I watch His Holiness playing bumper cars with his security to try to get to people who are, trying to get him to bless his mala or hold their baby up so that he could touch the baby's head. He doesn't know that baby. He doesn't know that family. He doesn't know who they are. They may have just murdered 10 people, right? But he just sees them as ultimate love. and just wants to get to them, so much so that he's breaking all the rules, that he's not supposed to break. And because, why are those rules there? Because, his life could be in danger. But he's willing to put his life in danger to do what? To pull someone from a burning building? No, just to walk up and show them affection. Why? Because a being like that knows every one of those beings was that kind, was the kindest of all kind to them. So amazing when you just watch a being like His Holiness and you see so many sentient beings that he meets up with. And when he was younger, if you read about his history, he'd be walking on a road and talking, and he'd see afar like animals that were being herded, and he'd be like, go buy them. Go buy them. And he would buy all of these livestock and put them in different places to keep them in sanctuaries so that they wouldn't be killed, because he saw every being he came in contact with this kind of love, with this kind of affection. So if you want to exude that affection and you want beings to react to you like His Holiness, you have to generate this kind of mind. It's the only thing that would kind of make a being like that. It's so profound. People get really tired sometimes of hearing all sentient beings have been my mother. Well, think about that. Think about what that means. Think about all sentient beings have had that close connection with you that you have right now. And if that being had fallen into a pit and they were, hanging on, if there was a cliff, they were hanging on by their fingernails, and you walked up to them and were just like, you're fine. What would that be like? A being who's realized this sees all sentient beings falling into cyclic existence because of ignorance and wants to save them. And that is really profound. Why does he or she want to save them from cyclic existence? Because he remembers their kindness as in previous lives. Since beginningless time, we've had all of these relationships. So you first cultivate this idea. So I believe that we're out of time. So we listed them. We got through the first. I promised you that this was not going to be a quick, delicate teaching on the 7-point cause and effect. I have all kinds of tabs in all of my books in front of me, and I'm looking at how long it takes to teach each of these topics thoroughly. And the things I had tagged off in my text will probably occur in months, not tonight. And that's okay, because we should go about this in a way where we come to the other side with a complete understanding of bodhicitta so we can get it. So we aren't missing anything, so that we, walk up to a being and we see them as our mother, every single one. And then we remember how kind they were to us through thinking of all these ways they were kind to us previously. And then we want to repay that kindness. And then once we kind of put the, Geshe Sonam Rinchen in his book on the Bodhisattva vows says that that's the kind of internal plumbing work. Affection for sentient beings is the internal plumbing that will allow you to pour the water that irrigates the field with love and to have compassion grow. So he calls these first 3 steps the kind of internal workings of an irrigation system. And he calls the love the irrigator that allows the fertile field of you that has these fertile things we talked about in your mind to allow bodhicitta to grow, to have compassion to grow. And this water, it allows the seed of compassion to grow, etc. So then, we have this internal plumbing that allows then for love, compassion, and an extraordinary attitude to turn into bodhicitta. So all of these things are the foundations that are necessary, the internal structure that is necessary in order for these things to work and for these things to happen. So why would we ever give a partial instruction on any of the steps if we knew that? So it's important that we don't do that. So this evening, I will end there. And if anyone has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them right now. If they're pertaining specifically to the material tonight, I know some of you have other questions as well, and I will definitely get into those discussions for sure. But now maybe there isn't enough time, and I think that we've covered enough for this evening. But if something related to this evening's material or anything that maybe you found might help others that I left out, feel free to share that as well. Okay, so let's do the concluding prayers. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming together this evening again to allow me to talk about bodhicitta, because it's really, really so good for my own mind to talk about these things and to be forced to relook at all of these things. It's very easy to just say, oh, I really know this topic. But then when I saw it today, again, for the millionth time, that kind of measure of whether or not you've realized the first step. And I saw that the measure of it was, do you, when you see every being, spontaneously think of how kind that being was to you? Think that they were your mothers previously. Think that they were your fathers, your parents. And I thought to myself when I saw that, wow, I have so much work to do, and how wonderful it is that I looked at this again. And I just want to thank you all for that, because through dependent origination, if there are students to hear the material, the teacher can present the material, and the teacher, if they're worth anything, should be prepared and should have the information to give the students. And all of the great teachers, even whenever you watch Khensa Geshe Wandak, they all had the text and looked at the text in front of them as they were giving the teaching, because they didn't want to leave anything out and they wanted to make sure it was thorough. Geshe Larampa relied upon the text the morning of and the day of the teaching, seemingly, in order to give us these teachings. So we should follow suit when we give teachings. So let's do the concluding prayers. The concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray that in all of our lives, we meet with Khensa Geshe Wandak in whatever form he chooses to emanate from the Dharmakaya. And may we accumulate the merit and engage in the practices that serve as the conditions for our meeting
with this great master in the future. And may we never be separated until we achieve complete enlightenment.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I'm just going to stop recording here and just